Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to West Devon Development Management and Licensing Committee. Nice to see we've got a good crowd in from the public. Before we go any further, I'll just ask members of the committee and officers around the table to introduce themselves so we all know who's here, starting with Councillor Kimber.
Sorry, I'm Councillor Kimber from Hatherley Ward.
Councillor Cunningham from Buckler Monacorum Ward.
Jeff Moody, Tavistock North. Jeff Moody, Tavistock North.
Sam Wakeham, Hatherley.
Caroline Mott, Bridistow Ward.
Ursula Mann, Tavistock North.
Val Richard Hill, Senior Planning Officer at Southampton, West Devon.
Jacqueline Houselander, Head of Development Management for West Devon, Lead Officer for this committee.
Richard Hill, Chair of this committee and Ward Member for Buckler Monacorum.
Terry Southcott, Ward Member for Bridistow and Vice Chair for this committee.
Cathy Hall, Democratic Services Officer for West Devon.
Okay, on with the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Jury and Councillor Kimber is substituting, and also apologies from Councillor Leach, and Councillor Guthrie will be joining online, but he will not be able to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be discussed at this meeting. Has anyone any declarable interests? No, thank you. Item 3, items requiring urgent attention. None have been brought to my attention. Item 4, confirmation of the minutes. You'll recall at our last meeting we deferred the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting because we didn't feel they quite covered the points that members had made. They have now been adjusted to include those comments. I'm content that they now reflect the comments that were held at the meeting. So can we therefore approve the minutes of the 21st of November and the meeting of the 31st of October? And the licensing subcommittee meeting on the 24th of October. Councillor Kimber.
Thank you. Can I just make a comment about, it's just minor, but on page 3, it says they also felt cycling to the shop from Hatherley on the lanes was safe. So I made that comment, and I don't think I mentioned Hatherley, but perhaps I did, but I meant cycling from Sapford, Courtney or North Taunton.
Okay, thank you. I'll include that. Any other comments on those minutes? Happy to approve. Okay, on to planning applications, and we have one to consider today, which is application 176923 FUL, which is Uphill, Yelverton, Buckler Monacorum, use of a walled garden for weddings, workshops and food events, construction of 4 ancillary buildings within the walled garden, use of part of an adjacent barn for wedding ceremonies, and construction of external staircase to barn, part of which is retrospective. And this is a resubmission of an application 299222. So I'll now turn to the planning officer to give her report.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application we have before us today is the use of walled garden for weddings, workshops and food events, construction of 4 ancillary buildings within the walled garden, use of part of the adjacent barn for wedding ceremonies and construction of external staircase to barn, and it's partly retrospective. So here in the hashed area we have the site. So
Right click.
So here we have the walled garden. We have the highway here, so it's largely single track with some passing places. We've got part of the open field for parking, and here we have access to the rear of the barn, and there's some more modern steps there proposed, and I think the intention is to use them for safety reasons. So we have a satellite image. So uphill here is a Grade 2 star listed building. That means it is of more than special interest, and it sits within the top 7% of listed buildings across England. I think this is quite helpful to show the relationship on the site. So here we have the Kirchridge listed walled garden and the Kirchridge listed barn. So a slightly zoomed out satellite image, and here you can see that it is isolated from any settlement. So we have some site photographs. So this is the wall. It gives you a sense of how imposing and impressive these walls are. This is to the rear of the walled garden, sort of generally looking across to Dartmoor on a bit of a clearer day. Here we've got an image from the inside of the walled garden, and you can see it's quite a domesticated garden now rather than a working garden, and here we have an image of uphill. So this is the proposed site plan. So the public highway is here. We have a gate and the access to this parking area. Then we have the walled garden, so we have the toilet block, the prep kitchen, the site for the marquee, and then we have the glass house here. It is worth pointing out that here we have no demarcation within this wider field between the parking area and the rest of the field. So the application is partly retrospective, so we have got some images of some of the structures on site. So this is the proposed toilet block. It's timber frame with timber cladding under a mono-pitch metal roof with UVPC guttering. It's approximately 7 metres in length, 3.3 metres in width and 2.85 metres to the ridge height with overhanging eaves. It's approximately 20 square metres, and we have got provision for a disabled toilet. So the proposed prep kitchen, again, the same materials. It's approximately 6 metres in length, 4 metres in width and 3 metres to ridge height with overhanging eaves, and it's approximately 21.5 square metres. And we've got a prep surfaces and a sink. So the proposed kitchen, again, the same materials, and this is approximately 7 metres in length, 4 metres in width, 3 metres to ridge height with overhanging eaves, and it's approximately 27 square metres. And we've got a sort of a serving hatch area, a pizza oven, and a sink. So you can see the pizza oven here in the corner. And the proposed glass house. So this is timber-framed glass house with a reclaimed brick plinth, single glazed glass and cast iron rainwater goods. The timber is to be sourced on the farm. It's approximately 9 metres in length, 7.5 metres in width and 3.75 metres to ridge height, approximately 50 square metres. The intention is to relay the existing paving slabs, and here you can see the siting for the glass house, so where we've got these chairs here in the corner. And then this is to the rear of the walled garden, so you can see the wall is a bit higher in some places. And it would sit approximately 1 metre over the height of the wall when you're to the rear of the walled garden. And the proposed works to the barn. So there are some unauthorised works which this application seeks to regulise. So we've got the glazed balustrade, we've got these modern timber steps, and it is worth noting we do have a barn owl residing here, and barn owls are a protected species. So some more site photographs. So as I say, as it's partly retrospective, you can take some photographs of some of the structures on site. So this is from outside the ward garden, and you can see towards the prep kitchen here, and there is some limited visibility of it from outside the ward garden. This is the parking area here, and this is looking up the road, so you can actually see a car up there to give you an idea of the site access. In the parking area, we've got space for approximately 40 cars with 3 disabled spaces. As I say, it's a mowed grass area without demarcation in the field. So at this point, I thought it would be helpful to share with you the submitted business plan for an idea of what would be going on. So the intention is for up to 15 courses of up to 20 attendees per calendar year for things like cheese making and beekeeping and Pilates, up to 20 events of 2 to 20 guests per calendar year, for example, elopement weddings, small birthday events, up to 10 day and evening events of 20 to 120 guests per calendar year, finishing no later than 10 p.m. So things like feasts, wakes and pizza evenings, and then up to 10 late finish events of 20 to 120 guests, finishing by midnight, so weddings, feast evenings, that sort of thing. So the key issues are set out in the officer report. This is a short reminder of what was in there, really. So in terms of the principle of development, we have got SPT1 and SPT2, which are spatial strategies which seek to create neighbourhoods and communities that are well served by public transport and services. And then TTV1, which sets out our settlement hierarchy, where growth is directed to the main towns in the first instance to promote self-containment and support new growth and existing services. So whilst we've got residential neighbours, the site is removed from a settlement, and so it's considered isolated in planning terms. And so this isn't a location where development is typically directed. So TTV 26 is our development in the countryside policy, and in this case the proposal doesn't relate to agriculture or forestry. The applicants have argued that it would secure the long-term future of the heritage asset. And then we've got Dev 15, which is about supporting the rural economy, and that's the policy that creates provisions for such developments in the countryside. So the fundamental issue of Dev 15 is it is caveated in suitable locations. Guests are unlikely to live locally, and so there is likely to be an increase in private motor vehicle use. The applicants have submitted a sustainable travel plan, and it explains that due to the nature of the events, guests being friends and family and the desire to consume alcohol, travel is often pre-organised as a group, and they have supplied information relating to public transport. It also has ambitions about cutting the private motor vehicle use, so there's an ambition for less than 20 single-use vehicles, with 50% of guests travelling by sustainable methods over a number of years, and they have calculated that the vehicle movements of their suppliers is about 23 over 3 days, so that's the day before, the day of, and the day after. It is difficult for us to enforce that visitors share transport. However, the site is about a kilometre from the A386, so that's the main road that connects Yelverton and Plymouth. Plymouth is a mainline key train station. The measures of the travel plan we therefore feel are reasonable, and any approval would be subject to securing the sustainable travel plan and requiring monitoring reports. In favour of the application, there is an argument that there is a boost to the rural economy. So for larger events, they can employ 3 kitchen staff, 3 bar staff, 1 front of house and 5 waiting staff. And they have provided information of their suppliers, and they are largely local and often quite small businesses. I would note that the SPD, so that's our supplementary planning document, requires any employment opportunities. We're not looking to support poorly paid, seasonal or insecure work, so there is a balance in there. And we also are looking to avoid incongruous or isolated new buildings, and you must explain why existing buildings can't be used in the first instance before new buildings are considered. You know, unfortunately, we are in a position where some of these structures are retrospective. However, the applicants have demonstrated that it is using locally sourced wood, sourced and sawn on the farm. It's been built on site. It is subservient in character and it is reversible. And again, that the glass house is consistent with contemporaneous working gardens. So the policies do pull in different directions, and it's something for you to keep in mind. So Section 66 of the 1919 Planning Act means that we have a statutory duty to have special regard to the desirability of preserving the listed building or its setting and any features of special architectural or historic interest which it possesses. And we also have the policies set out in Dev 20 and Dev 21. So the walled garden is fairly sizable, as you might have noticed from the site photographs. It suggests it supplied high-value produce to markets in Plymouth, potentially provision to the Navy, and it really reinforces the high status of the house. So as a reminder, Uphill Complex is associated with the top 7% of listed buildings across England, and it is a really important site. There isn't any evidence for these structures on the site, but working gardens would evolve, adapting to changing needs. So whilst they are retrospective and fairly commercial structures, it does detract from the way that the site can be experienced and understood, in the sense that it now has the character of a more domesticated garden and not a working garden space. So we have identified, in terms of paragraphs 199 to 202 of the NPPF, less than substantial harm. So as per case law in Bedford, less than substantial harm does not equate to less than significant planning objection. Any harm to a designated heritage asset should be afforded considerable importance and weight as per case law in Barnwell Manor. So paragraph 202 of the NPPF requires that this harm is then outweighed against the public benefits of the proposal. So in this case, we have got wider economic benefits. The applicants have submitted a phased schedule of repair to the walled garden and to the curtilage listed structures. And many of these structures are reversible, and they're a wooden temporary subservient character, and they could be removed. And considering the application, we feel there is sufficient weight to outweigh the harm identified. So in terms of the landscape, the site is within the Tamar Valley National Landscape, so formerly known as the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, and it is afforded the highest statutory landscape protection. It is also in proximity to Dartmoor National Park, although we have not received any response from them. The applicants have submitted a lighting strategy and a noise management plan. So if I run through those with you, in terms of the lighting strategy, the lighting would be on the sides opposite neighbours. There will be metal shields to avoid light spill. 50% of the marquee lighting would be turned off after guests have left, and the other would be, so the toilet block, etc., would be when the guests leave. It's all in that management plan. So it's been considered that this could be managed, and therefore we feel that the impact on the tranquility could be managed. Enhancements have been offered, so we've got reinforcement of the existing hedging to the southern boundary with native species. In terms of ecology, there is the barn owl, so that's a protected species of bird which is protected from disturbance during the nesting season. After lots of back and forth with DCC Ecology and the Barn Owl Trust, it has been deemed acceptable subject to soundproofing in the barn, a new barn box to be near the barn, and that will be a condition to be discharged prior to the commencement of works. So we've secured that, and monitoring assessments. In terms of highways, in the access is partially single track, Class C county road, with passing spaces. There is off-street parking with space to manoeuvre within the site, so approximately 40 car parking spaces with 3 disabled spaces. Officers acknowledged the concerns raised in the representations received. However, on balance, it was felt that this is a limited number of vehicles for a limited number of events over a short period in time, and we haven't received concerns from the DCC County Highways Authority. So in terms of amenity, this application is contentious. Devon, Protecting Health and Amenity, offers protection from noise disturbance for both new and existing residents, workers and visitors. Unacceptable impacts will be judged against the level of amenity generally in the locality. We have received a number of objections on this basis, including concerns from the Parish Council. As per Environmental Health's comments, hearing noise is not a justification for refusing an application, as many activities in the countryside and elsewhere cause noise at times, and that restriction on the number of events is an appropriate way to control the general noise levels. We have got a submitted noise management plan that explains, that sets out how noise would be managed. So we would have a noise management officer on site, and they are qualified. They would carry out monitoring, establish background noise, have a noise management log and complaints log to be submitted when requested for the local planning authority and environmental health, and it would be reviewed annually. So the intention is to have live music cease by 11 o'clock and all music to cease by midnight. Any approval would lead the applicants to invest in a digital signal processor which can process and therefore limit all signals, so they can control noise of any outside bands, for example. That would be then cut out at a certain level, so it can't be bypassed. There'll be no fireworks and no camping, and we haven't conditioned them because they would not be happening. So these are the conditions we've got at present. Licensing related issues are a separate matter, and they will be dealt with by licensing. We do have environmental health with us and also available for questioning. So ultimately, it is worth noting that there were 32 representations received in response to this application, so about 16 in support and 16 in objection. Our policies do sometimes pull in different directions, and ultimately planning is a balance. In this case, the proposal largely accords with the criteria for development to be supported in this location, this development, because it offers various public benefits and enhancements. The application is finely balanced, and in this case, officers have recommended 4 approvals subject to conditions, and they are shown on the screen, and we can run through them if you would like.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive run through this application. Members of the committee, have you any particular questions for the planning officer? Councillor Mott.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to find the page where I've got a couple of questions, if I may. My understanding is that the strategic policies trump the development policies. So with regard to sustainable locations, etc.
They don't trump them as such. They are the starting point at which our officers will review a planning proposal. So the strategic policies, if you like, are the overall aims of the joint local plan, and then the other policies effectively fall from them. So they will accord with but fall from them. So the SPT policies, SPT1 and SPT2, are very much about trying to promote sustainable development, and that's where they lie. And then the TTV policies are slightly more detailed, and then the dev policies are sat below the TTV policies. So they don't really trump them. It's a sort of a series of considerations. So we start with the SPT policies, and as is written in the report, it starts at that point and then then reviews the TTV policy. In fact, in this case, TTV 26 is obviously quite key, and then policy Dev 15, which looks much more closely at the rural economy and how that and how proposals meet or don't meet that policy.
Yes, thank you. I see that we've also got the associated application for the listed building consent. Is that subject to this consent being allowed? I'm just curious why that application isn't being considered alongside this one at committee, since they are so closely tied.
So the listed building consent application relates to the works of the barns themselves. So that's the way that the listed building consent works. So because there were not objections received to the works of the barns themselves, that application is not with committee, and we'll do that through the delegated process with the ward members for the area. The principal issues are relating to the change of use and the wedding use, so that's why we brought this application to committee.
Okay, so I can safely assume then that the alterations that have been made to the barn are accepted with a heritage view to them?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you very much. That's it for now. I'm sure I'll think of something else later. Thank you.
Councillor Kimber and then Councillor Moody.
Okay. Can you help me understand? I think you said that the glass house is compatible with contemporary working gardens, but it also says in the report the glass house is complementary to the walled garden, which is the same thing, I think. It says, however, this is not as easily reversed and is not authentic in its siting or design. Can you explain to me a bit about what authentic means compared to being compatible, please? Thank you.
So as you say, we've got the words compatible and we've got the words complementary. So the different policies use these words. So where we're referring to the policy, we try and use the words from that policy. So that's why we've got various words in there. In this case, the siting of the glass house is fitting in with the marquee. So if we didn't have anything in that walled garden and we were starting from scratch with the glass house, we might have it a bit slimmer along the whole of the southern wall, but in this case it's had to be sort of moved to fit in with what else is going on site.
Does that answer my question about being authentic? Does authentic refer to the fact that if it was built 300 years ago, it would look different?
We feel that if it was from scratch, it would be slightly different, but we have got the submitted heritage statement from a qualified heritage consultant who feels that that is acceptable, so we do weigh that in the balance.
Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. On the greenhouse, what's the purpose of the greenhouse? Is it going to be used for functions, or is it going to be used for growing things?
So I can pull up the floor plan for that if you would like now to share as I explain. Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
One other question about the conditions relating to noise, about amplified music. Does that also apply to amplified speech and singing?
Okay, so I believe it does. I would suggest that you direct noise-related questions to environmental health because they are the experts. In terms of the glass house, I believe the intention is to use it, but there are there is the plan I can bring up for you. It shows the different potting benches with the various plants inside. So I think the intention is also to use it as a gardening space.
I have one question relating actually to the discussion that took place at the parish council about noise. And the condition on noise has sort of changed slightly as the application has gone through consideration. And now my understanding is that the noise level at the boundary of neighbouring properties should be no greater than ambient. And I just wanted the committee and for others listening to sort of understand what that actually means. Does it mean that if you are a neighbour of this property whilst an event is taking place, you will not hear anything? Or does it mean something slightly different to that?
I'm going to pass that question over to Environmental Health.
Oh, hello, everybody. My name's Janet Wallace. I work for the Environmental Health team of Southampton, West Devon Council, and I've been dealing with this application. Yes, the purpose was that the music noise would, if you like, blend in to the background noise level or the ambient noise level at the time. So in the countryside, it's pretty low, which I think we've outlined in the report, and it would normally be, you know, at night, I don't know, wind and leaves in the trees, you know, that kind of noise. And the additional condition that was added relatively recently was basically to ensure that any music noise that was audible beyond the boundary of the site just blends into the background. So from the point of view of your ears, you might hear it as a vague noise in the distance, but you wouldn't be able to stand in your porch and sing along or identify the music. And we felt that was actually pretty important. Now, the effect of that condition really means that you wouldn't be able to have loud discos playing at these weddings or loudly amplified music, because you wouldn't be able to achieve that noise condition. You know, a kind of duo singing or country music or something that is amplified so that in the venue you get an even noise distribution is fine, but essentially what we're looking for is that it isn't clearly audible off-site. So, and it does. So somebody mentioned speech, anything that goes through a microphone, regardless of whether it's speech or music, is amplified. So it applies to all of that.
And from the point of view of monitoring, if you've got and I'm not quite sure what the machine's called, but if you've got a machine that's measuring noise and it's registering ambient, and then the event starts, you wouldn't expect that to be discernible above ambient.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's a sound level meter, and the onus of responsibility is, as within all these situations, and I'm sure you've dealt with it in licensing as well, is with the applicant. So it's for them to demonstrate that they're complying, and that's why we've asked for the noise management plan, because that requires them to keep an eye on stuff as the evening goes on, and to make adjustments. And also the noise limiter, which is also in the management plan, that will be set so that if somebody is playing music too loudly, the noise limiter automatically cuts it back to an appropriate level.
Thank you very much. Very clear. Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Wakeman.
Could you explain how close the neighbours actually are?
Are there any other questions whilst we're looking for the answer to that one? Councillor Mann.
This is just for the environmental health. From the perspective of, when this condition is put in place, if it's approved, what is the remedy for if they don't comply for that?
Okay, so there are kind of three ways to approach it. The reason for including conditions like this in the planning approval is so that the applicant is quite clear what they need to achieve in order to meet the planning, the planning policies. If complaints are received once events start, we encourage people to make their complaint to environmental health. Environmental health officers would investigate to determine whether or not it was unreasonable, and it would be them that look at the noise records on the night and investigate. And now, essentially, if we were to get complaints from residents saying that they could hear the music really clearly, and quite often now they're recording it and sending videos in, which is really helpful. If they're standing on their doorsteps and listening to music and we're able to identify the track and sing along if we want to, then we know that is going to have breached that condition. But it would tend to be dealt with through the environmental health statutory nuisance process, but using this as a basis. So the requirements are the same, it's just a lot quicker and easier to do it through environmental health.
So just from the perspective of from a planning perspective, you could end up in a situation where you've approved the building work and all of the work to this property, but if they violated that, you would end up not being able to use it for the purposes that we've just discussed. Is that?
You could end up in a situation where we have to serve a noise abatement notice in environmental health that will trump, if you like, the planning condition. And so it might well be that that abatement notice would prohibit the use of the venue for amplified music. So that this, in dealing with this at planning, basically sets out the baseline to which an applicant needs to work. So it gets in place the monitoring, the sound limiter. Let's face it, it's going to severely restrict the kind of entertainment that can be held. So if a wedding party wanted a disco, they're not going to be able to have it because they won't be able to meet this criteria. So, yeah, does that explain that?
Councillor Wakeman, your question was how far from the venue is the nearest property?
So there are a number of neighbouring residential neighbours. I thought the easiest way would be to show you on Google Earth because they're all over when you start taking measurements. So to the east we have, we've got some neighbouring properties within sort of 100 metres. We then, to the north, we're talking about 200 metres, and to the south, we're talking about 280 metres. And further away, we have more and more houses. But this is isolated in settlement terms. So we do have sort of groups of of other people elsewhere. Yeah.
Councillor Kimber and Councillor Moody, do you have a question? Oh, Councillor Kimber, then Councillor Moody.
Thank you. So I've lost track of this, but this is amplified music we're talking about. So if we have unamplified music, are there restrictions on that as well?
The noise management plan covers all music, amplified and unamplified. Live music that isn't amplified isn't likely to be intrusive at even 100 metres away. One of the reasons for that, actually, which is a kind of bonus for this site, is the wall, because obviously that thick wall is going to provide quite substantial noise mitigation on that side. And then there are other structures in between the noise source and the nearest residential facade. So yeah, the noise management plan applies to both, but we know from experience it's the amplified music that tends to travel so far. Now, some residents have mentioned, and quite rightly, hearing the hubbub of people chattering and stuff outside. At times that would be audible because there's an event on, but we didn't consider that to be anything that is likely to badly affect any residents for any long period of time. The other thing is that, and that the Google map we just put up was quite useful there. Any particular resident will only be able to hear it when they themselves are downwind on that night. So the people to the south are least likely to hear it because most of our winds are from the south and southwest. And that, with the way amplified music carries, that's highly significant. So we've taken all of that into account.
Councillor Moody.
That's just stolen my thunder. Because I was going to ask about the prevailing winds and whether in your consultation, whether you've included measurements from different points, or is it just a general desktop assessment that you've made?
Okay, so we don't, for any planning application, we don't kind of go out and make measurements ourselves, but we do know from, years of taking noise measurements for various reasons, two fundamental things. Essentially, in the countryside, the background noise level is around about 25 decibels, and for people that think, oh, what does that mean? Me talking in this room now is probably about 50. So 25 is really quite quiet. And in terms of the wind, it's a kind of wind roses and things are a standard thing. And we know that in the southwest, about 75% of our wind comes from the southwest and the south. So 25% comes from the east, and don't we know it when that happens, and the north. So we do take that into account as well.
Can I just ask for the officer to put up the venue when it's going to be in operation, because I think that might be helpful for members to know when they're likely to be held, when events are likely to be held during the year. Is it going to be seasonal, weekends, midweek, whatever? And that might be helpful.
While we're looking for that, are there any other questions? Councillor Kimber.
Thank you. Can I talk about the barn owl, please? Is it right to change the subject? Yeah, so the barn owl is living in the barn, I assume. So there'll be lots of people in the barn. Are they okay with that?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? I didn't hear the end of that. Sorry.
Yeah, it's probably pretty basic question, but the barn owl is living in the barn, and there'll be lots of people in the barn. Are the barn owls happy to stay there when there's lots of people?
Right, so as you can imagine, we've had a lot of discussions with DCC Ecology and the Barn Owl Trust about this. The applicants were arguing about this being relative to the existing noise on the sort of in the agricultural landscape. DCC Ecology considered this, and they felt that provided there was the soundproofing of where the barn currently is, and then there is a provision for a new barn owl box, and it has to be a certain distance and a certain height away from the existing, and so that gives the barn owl, and that would have to be in place for 3 months as a minimum, to give the barn owl opportunity to move if it so wished. And then we would have to have monitoring as well, so DCC Ecology can sort of track and consider and see if they're happy with it. And ultimately, Barn Owl Trust and DCC Ecology were happy about that. The Barn Owl Trust did request a couple of other things. So they did ask for ceremonies to be conducted in daylight hours and a guest exclusion zone following the ceremony. Ultimately, in planning, we have to make sure that any planning conditions meet the 6 tests, and we and DCC Ecology felt that those did not meet the tests. So we've retained all the other things that DCC Ecology required. So the soundproofing, the new barn box, and the monitoring. But we haven't included those because we felt we couldn't legally ask them to meet the planning conditions. So ultimately, our ecology specialists accepted that, and there was a lot of back and forth on that.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move to the next stage? Councillor Mann, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to understand a little bit about the heritage aspect of this planning application, because it appears to me that the reason that SPPT1 doesn't prevent it is because of the heritage aspect. So can you speak to what the importance of the building is and how that part of the planning relates to, because I didn't quite understand, just because we recently had a similar case, but there was no heritage and that was kind of presented the other direction. So I just wanted to understand the importance of that.
So as you say, TTV 26, so that's development in the countryside. The caveats are generally relating to agriculture and then to heritage assets. So in terms of heritage assets, we do want to support our proposals that will secure our heritage assets for the future. So in this case, the argument is that it will provide economic benefits to the site to then invest in the heritage asset, and we do have a phased schedule of repairs. So we will have the western wall being recapped, the western wall being repointed, the farm stall roof being repaired, and then we have all the remaining walls to be recapped and repointed at a later date. So that should secure the built fabric of the Kirchhoff-listed walled garden for the future, and that is a benefit to be considered in the planning balance.
Councillor Moody, we've got your...
Thank you very much. Yeah, sorry. Yes, I'm happy, just if we leave that there, just to give us an idea of what type of events are happening. On the heritage issue, you said you've got a programme of repairs to the listed building based on the activity. I was under the impression that that had to be submitted to Heritage England or English Heritage or whatever it's called now. Has that happened?
So they wanted it to be supplied, and it has. We've reviewed it and we're happy with it. What we will need, so that has been secured as one of the plans as part of the conditions, so they'd have to accord with it. And then they will then have to submit the listed building consent applications for those repair works if they require listed building consent. And that's a discussion we will have with the applicants if approval were granted.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think we've had a good opportunity to quiz the planning officer ourselves. We've got two registered speakers. Mr. Murray Ross, is he here? Yes, and Christopher Hayes. Okay, well, first, if Mr. Ross could come up. Good morning. Are you familiar with how these committees work? You have 3 minutes to say whatever you wish to the committee. The committee will then have an opportunity to ask you questions should they wish to. When you're ready, press the button and off you go.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, council members. My name is Murray Ross. I'm a director at Avalon Planning and Heritage, and I'm speaking on behalf of the residents at Moray House, located approximately 200 metres from the application site, and the garden boundary being 180 metres from the application site. The site is located at a sensitive Grade 2 star listed property in the open countryside within the Tamar Valley AONB, 400 metres from the Dartmoor National Park. There are a number of other residential properties in close proximity to the site, the closest being less than 100 metres from the application site. AONBs are nationally protected landscapes that are given the highest degree of protection. The Tamar Valley AONB management plan includes a requirement to maintain and, where possible, increase levels of tranquility. The site has been operating as a wedding venue without planning permission for almost 24 months, and it has already been demonstrated that the proposal has had a significant impact on residential amenity by way of noise and disturbance. The residents at Moray House were affected to such an extent that they could not sit outside in their garden or open their windows during wedding events. It is understood that wedding events will primarily be held within a marquee and within the walled garden. There will therefore be very little sound insulation or barrier between the event and surrounding residential properties. The residents at Moray House have commissioned their own noise assessment, which has been submitted to the council. Background noise levels were recorded and are considered very low, which is expected given the tranquil character of the area. A recommended planning condition requires that amplified music should not be played in such a way that is audible at the boundary of nearby residents. However, given that the closest resident is less than 100 metres away, and given the very low background noise levels, it has already been demonstrated that it is highly unlikely the applicants can comply with this condition, which is entirely reliant on neighbouring residents to enforce. National planning practice guidance is clear that when noise impacts are predicted to cause a material change in behaviour, such as keeping windows closed for most of the time, the planning process should be used to avoid the situation occurring. Turning to traffic impact, it has been suggested that the site is served by public transport. However, the nearest bus stop is located over 3/4 of a mile away, and the last bus to Plymouth is at 10 p.m. on Saturdays. Guests would therefore need to leave the venue at around 9:30 p.m. and walk via unlit country lanes which have no footway in order to access public transport. As such, it is considered very unlikely that the targets set out in the submitted travel plan will be met, and the local residents and the tranquility of the AONB will continue to be affected by the impacts of vehicle traffic coming to and from the site. In summary, the proposed wedding venue is located in an unsustainable countryside location within an AONB where tranquility and dark skies are special qualities to be protected and maintained. The economic benefits of the proposal do not outweigh the significant harm to the character of the AONB and the substantial impact on the living conditions of neighbouring residents. The proposed mitigation is entirely insufficient to address the clear negative impacts. In short, this highly sensitive Grade 2 star listed site is not a suitable location for an outdoor wedding venue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for almost keeping to the time. Any questions for Mr. Ross, please, from the committee. No, looks like you've escaped. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I next call Mr. Hayes, please, who is the applicant? Welcome to the committee. Same rules apply. 3 minutes to say what you have to the committee, and then the committee might wish to ask you some questions. When you're ready, press the button and go.
Good morning, Chair, councillors. My wife Charlotte and I are the owners of Uphill Farm Events. We've been operating for the last 3 years as a venue, providing up to 7 events per year. Our style of event is a relaxed garden party within the confines of a walled garden, and enjoying the views over to Kit Hill when the ceremonies are within the barn, currently with a 5-star rating on Google and social media. At pre-app, we had our planning officer, police licensing, EHO and heritage specialist present, which formed the base of this application, and have been consulted positively throughout the application process, evolving to the recommended approval we have now. This planning permission is seeking to increase the amount of events and become a course hub for people who have a location to share their knowledge and traditional skills and well-being. To clarify, there will be 20 events with the provision of amplified music, 10 to midnight, 10 to 2200, live music stopping at 2300. There will be 20 elopement weddings with a maximum of 20 people without the provision of amplified music, and 15 courses. These could be floristry, fire cooking, beekeeping, yoga, and painting, to name a few. Of the 20 events with the provision of live music, not all likely be to weddings. One event type will be seasonal feasting nights with long tables and feasting platters. With this planning mission, it will allow us to install a high-tech zone array system that will provide us with full control over music. It will be impossible for bands and DJs to break our limitations. Other wedding venues that operate in similar rural locations use this system to great effect, often with more than 4 weddings per week throughout the whole year. Examples of this are Shilston House in the South Hams and Ever After, located at Grenetham. SB Consulting, a local sound engineering company, conducted a feasibility study at Jennycliff, with the nearest property being only 70 metres away. This system was able to bring the noise limitations down to within regulations. Currently, we operate within the highest noise regulations allowed when hosting less than 12 outdoor events a year. If this application is approved, it will reduce us to the lowest limit within regulations. EHO consultation has generated a condition that will go beyond this, ensuring that amplified music will not exceed that of background noise levels at the neighbouring properties, providing a solution to the main concern of noise mentioned in the objections and by the local parish council. Local amenity has always been at the forefront of our considerations. When we started, we asked for feedback on how we can improve and what caused the most impact. This resulted in us not allowing certain types of live music and putting up more signs to ensure guests find our venue. This has led to our nearest neighbour here today in support, as well as local suppliers, employees, previous clients, and our local vicar whose church benefits from having a reception venue within the parish. As a young family, we pride ourselves in using sustainably, locally sourced produce and supporting local businesses, providing a proven source of income to the local economy. Some of our suppliers being Bidders Butchers, The Larder, Dartmoor Flowers, Sovereign Wines, and Dartmoor Brew, for example. Our staff are all from local area, generating a source of income for them. I thank you for your time for considering this application.
Okay, well done for sticking to the time. Questions for Mr. Hayes from the committee? Councillor Mott.
Thank you. There have been several questions raised about the sustainability of the application and its location and the reliance of the bus, for example. And I note that there are no provision for any electric charging points for any electric cars that might come to the site, or for solar panels or any other mitigation in that respect. Are there plans to do that?
Currently, at the moment, due to the sheer cost of putting in electric charging points, I know that's not a very good excuse, but because we have quite a lot of outlay at the moment, and having the power to be able to provide it up there, at the moment there are no intentions to be putting in charging points, but as this site develops and as the infrastructure becomes greater in the area, so the provision of 3-phase, we'll be able to start looking at getting charging points. With the barn itself, that will be the only sort of suitable source that we'll be able to place solar panels. Again, it's curtilage listed, so that would generate some some issues, I'd imagine. And the rest of the farm is 50 acres. My parents' farm's 50 odd acres, which is all currently being used for beef. So we don't want to detract from putting up so big solar panel arrays within that field.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Moody.
Thank you very much for the information. That's very helpful. Just wanted to know, what's going through my mind is your business, is it seasonal? And if you could just explain when events would not be happening and when your peak times are. Obviously, I would imagine the peak times being through the summer. If you just tell me how the seasonality works.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the events, the large events that need the provision of the marquee, we're looking at from May to September. We're an outdoor sort of wedding venue, so using the grass and with having so many guests around, it would sort of destroy the area. So we've only just gone for May to September for the larger events, so the 10 to midnight, 10 to 1000. The elopement weddings, because they're only sort of very small amount of people in courses, they won't really cause that many issues because they're a maximum of 20 people. So they can be conducted throughout the year, but there will be no marquee up for those.
Just one more question and I don't know whether there is an answer to this, is that with marquees, is there any way of soundproofing marquees? If you're going to do it between May and September, it's going to be hot and you can't keep them enclosed, and so is there an answer to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we currently at the moment operating with a traditional petal pole marquee. When we gain more sources of funding, that marquee only has a certain lifespan. So when we look to change that marquee out, we can go for a more firmer frame, and within that they can have acoustic panelling which put in the canopy. But the main thing with this one is the zone array system. It hasn't been inputted into this because it's something that's been recently sort of looked at. The zone array system is a targeted speaker system, much like you'd see in a museum. When you're walking past an exhibit, you'll hear the sound, and then when you walk past, it stops. So this sits directly above the dance floor, and it points directly onto the dance floor. And as soon as you step off, it has an immediate 10 decibel reduction, which is essentially, with the logarithmic side of it, it halves the volume in a way, so it makes it a lot more controllable. But yeah, we can put, so round drummers, we can put sound barriers, so it prevents that travel of the bass and the snare, which is one of the concerns. And then with the wall, with the direction of the zone array, we can also point it into softer areas as well.
Councillor Mann.
So it sounds like you might have some events going on year round, and I think one of the issues here was around the sustainability of the employment, and I just wondered whether you'd be continuing to employ people on a year-round basis with those events?
Absolutely, yeah. We need, so throughout the year, when we have meetings, we still need to have our staff there as well. So we do, when they come round with our guests, we have sort of tasting nights, so we need our chef available. The gardens always need maintenance, so the gardener will always be employed. We also have a lot of work that needs doing around the area, so the general sort of handymen that put up the marquee, they'll be also employed throughout the season.
I just have one question on the, again, I'm afraid going back to the noise issue. It sounds like a fairly sort of sophisticated system to control the noise not escaping the boundary. Is this equipment you currently already have, or is this equipment you will need to install in order to satisfy the conditions that are within the planning application?
Yes, so it's equipment we need to source. We currently have a company called Direct Acoustics. They have already designed and are ready to build the system. Our quote is ready to go at the moment. So once we have approval, we can press the button and we can get that built. Because the way we operate now, with the marquee goes up and down every single event, and to have that system built every single time, it would be an extraordinary amount of money. It would be £1,200 per event just for the sound engineer to build it every time. And with that, the system, the company, they do annual servicing and testing. So they'll be coming in every single year, they'll be testing the background, then they'll go out to the sampling points. So we have 3 sampling points that I do in an evening. And they'll test the output of the system at those points to confirm that it's not going to go above ambient.
Thank you. Councillor Moody.
Thank you very much. I noticed that you're going to have records of complaints, and you have a complaint procedure. Could you just explain to us exactly what's entailed in in that system of registering and dealing with resolving complaints? Thank you.
Yes, so myself as the noise assessor, so I'm a qualified noise assessor for HSE, Noise at Work. We have a complaints log which generates where it comes from, what noise is heard, how long it's been heard for. It covers things like weather conditions as well, so it'll give us an idea of why it was travelling that far. And then in there it has a record of how we will liaise with EHO to say, this is the concern. And then we'll come back. So once we've done an investigation as to why that noise has been heard, we then report back to the person that's made the complaint to say, thank you for your complaint, apologies to them, and then we detail steps on how we'll mitigate it in the future.
Any other questions for Mr. Hayes? No? Thank you very much. Okay, well, we've had a good cant around this application. I'm now going to move the recommendation. This is simply to move the process into debate, so it's not an indication of how the eventual vote will take place, but the officer's recommendation is for conditional approval. Can I have a seconder for that?
I'm happy to second that.
We're now in debate. Anyone have any points they wish to make before we go to a vote? What? I can hardly believe it. Okay, no comments. No. Councillor Mott, you've come to my rescue.
Go on then. I will give it a go. These types of applications are always difficult because we've always expressed a desire to be able to support the rural economy better than we have been able to with some of the previous applications. And I am mindful of its location and the possible impact of noise on the neighbours, which again I know has been an issue on previous applications. It's a difficult one. I can understand the concerns of the neighbours with regard to noise, but I would hope that the management plan is sufficiently robust enough in this instance that we are able to mitigate and police that effectively and better than we have in other applications. Therefore, I am happy to go with the officer recommendation in this instance and hope that we are able to monitor any possible side effects of this adequately.
Thanks. Any other comments before we go to the vote? Right, those in favour of the officer's recommendation, which is for conditional approval, please show. Any against?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. So that recommendation is approved subject to the conditions set out in the application. Thank you very much. Those in the auditorium are very happy to stay for the next bit of the agenda. You may not wish to. No. So please be on your way if you need to be. Thank you. Right, item 6 on our agenda is planning appeals update. Mrs. Hauslander.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Okay. So there are a number of appeals on the agenda this month. Some of them have just appeals which have been lodged, but others obviously have had an appeal decision. So if I just go through the ones that have had a decision, the first one, 239122 HHO, was a householder application for a rear extension. The officer recommendation was for refusal, but the inspector has approved the application. The main issue with this was the effect of the development on the character and appearance of the host building and the surrounding area. It was identified as being within the setting of Dartmoor National Park, and the inspector has therefore had regard to the MPPF paragraph 176, which relates to national parks in terms of the setting, and there's a need to be a consideration in terms of its location and design in relation to the national park. In the development plan terms, policy TTV 29 includes consideration of residential extensions in rural areas, and also the SPD has some information in relation to it. The inspector, there is within the SPD there is a reference to if the proposed extension is more than 50% larger, more than 50% an addition, there are three criteria which the extension needs to meet. If it improves the design of the building, if it has no impact on the primacy of the host dwelling, and if it would have any negative impact on the amenity space around the building. The inspector in this case concluded that the only views of the proposed extension were from some distance away, and he also didn't feel that the primacy of the host dwelling would be unduly diminished, and he also concluded that it would not have a negative impact on the external amenity space. And as a result, he allowed the appeal. This is quite controversial, this proposal. I know the parish council locally had recommended approval. I think the original application, originally the planning application, the existing dwelling was a replacement for a 2-bedroom house, and the replacement was quite large, and then there's an additional quite large extension. So it was very controversial with the parish, and I think the parish have identified that they're quite unhappy with the inspector's decision. Yeah, that's all I can say really.
Yeah, if I could add to that, please. It was a very controversial application originally because the original application was refused because of its size and scale. That then came in as a smaller building, which was then significantly extended, and then with this extra addition put onto it. I would hope that we are able to question this decision. I feel that sometimes we should actually question the planning appeal decisions, because it was felt by the parish council that the neighbourhood plan hadn't been considered at all within the report, and the fact that it was already a significant size within the area, with an addition, with the extensive addition to it, that then makes that a significantly sized building within a rural area, which doesn't reflect the requirements of the neighbourhood plan. So I would hope that we are able to express that concern back to the planning inspector, please.
My own and perhaps other members of the committee's edification, if you appeal against an appeal decision, which is effectively what I think Councillor Mobb's suggesting.
I'm not necessarily, because I appreciate we are not able to change that decision now, so and we are unable to effectively appeal an appeal once that decision has been made by the inspector. but I would like to feel that we are able to feed back to the inspector that we don't feel that the neighbourhood plan was taken into consideration, and the fact that it is now a building of significant size within a rural setting when the original building was a small building, bearing in mind that we have a lack of small buildings within that area, and there have been a lot of extensive development within that area and within that stretch of road, if you like, within Thorndon Cross. So my concern is the fact that we are seeing a lot of development in that area with large buildings going up and smaller buildings being extended by a significant amount.
But I think the inspector is obliged, is he not, to give equal weight to the neighbourhood plan as he is to the development plan?
Yes, if it's a made development, if it's a made neighbourhood plan, it carries the same weight as the joint local plan.
So worth making a comment back.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bob.
I'm not suggesting we start down a divisional
Any other
review, Councillor Moody.
appeals you want to bring to our attention?
Sorry. Yeah, so the next one. The officer recommendation was for refusal, and the appeal inspector agreed with the recommendation and dismissed the appeal. There were two issues, one about the character and appearance of the area, and the other one relating to biodiversity. In terms of character and appearance, the inspector concluded that it would introduce it was for 3 dwellings, introduce a very wide block of development where there is none currently, and he felt that the bulk and massing of the development would introduce as he described it, an untypical prominent feature in the landscape, and so therefore agreed with the officer recommendation. In regards to the protected tree, which was an oak and it was TPO'd, he concluded that the proposed because part of the development was an incursion on the root protection area, he felt that the proposal would have a harmful effect on the protected tree. In terms of biodiversity, the concern really was that because this site had been the subject of 2 previous applications, and the concern was that the ecology statement related to the previous application, which was a different scale of development, and therefore there was no up-to-date information in terms of the impact on ecology, and therefore he again agreed with the officer that information should have been updated in order to be relevant to this application. So, in effect, agreed with the officer on all 3 counts. The next one is the application for the erection of a 5-bedroom house in Leg Farm, Highhampton. This was submitted under what's called paragraph 80E, which is in the MPPF, and that is where a development is of outstanding architectural or other value, and the application was quite an unusual design, and included a fishing sort of hatchery almost underneath the building, and I think the applicant felt that this would be a convincing part of the of the exceptional design. However, the inspector didn't agree with any of it actually, but he thought whilst they were proposing some very good Dev 32 measures such as solar panels, ground source heat pump, and solar gain, the building itself was so out of character with the local area that he felt that it wasn't sufficient enough to meet the quite strict standards applied to development under paragraph 80E of the MPPF, and therefore dismissed the appeal.
I think, though, if we ever get another application for a zooplankton propagation pond, we ought to bring it to committee.
Yes. And then the 4th one is, again, a householder application. It was refused by the officer, but again upheld by the inspector. The main issue, again, was the effect on the character and appearance of the area, and the scale of the development. Again, it was an extension to a barn, I think, and the inspector in this case felt that the proposed extension was very much in accordance with this sort of character of the barn as it exists, even though it's been converted to a house, and indicated that its massing would be reflective of the distinctive, simple marked lines and robust nature of the host property, and concluded that, having regard to the barn guide, we call it, which is part of this supplementary planning document, that they would have a neutral effect on this non-designated heritage asset, and therefore thought that the proposal would preserve the character and appearance of the area. So, if anybody's got any questions about those, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. Councillor Mann.
This is just a question. So where the ones that are in the appeal say officer delegated or officer member delegated, does that indicate that they were considered by council at the time when it says officer member delegated next to them? Or I just was wondering what the difference is between officer delegated and officer member delegated.
So officer delegated is whereby the application is decided by the officer. And officer member delegated is where we send the application with a recommendation to the board members, and they either agree or disagree with the decision. If there's a disagreement with the decision, it needs to come to the planning committee.
I think the distinction is sometimes driven by whether there are complaints, objections to the application.
Yes. Yeah. So if an application is if there's no objections and it's recommended for approval, that's when it's officer delegated. If there's an application where the officer wants to recommend approval, but there are objections, that's when it would go to the ward members. And in fact, if a consultee objected and there was a recommendation for approval.
Okay, onwards to the last item on our agenda, which is undetermined major applications. Last time, you may remember, I asked about the first one because it's been on the books for a long time, and you hoped to come back with a bit of news.
I do have some news. So the officer dealing with this, there's two applications on this list relating to the old. One's called the Old Woolen Mill and the other one's called the Wool Grading Centre. Stephen Stroud, I've had a discussion with him. He had a discussion with the applicants who are trying to overcome the flooding issue, and so he has given them until Christmas, till we close down at Christmas, to submit that information, and if they have not, he will be making a recommendation for refusal.
Okay. So that should draw itself to a conclusion one way or another around about Christmas time. Yeah. Okay. Anyone got any other questions on undetermined major applications? Councillor Mann.
There was a question that was raised through someone representing the former Hazelden Preparatory School site, and I just wondered, this one just says currently under review, and that's just whether there's an update on that.
The application was awaiting some information from the heritage officer who is dealing with the actual works to the Hazelden house itself, and he has had a conversation with the architect, and we're now awaiting the plans that they discussed. But it is hoped that information will allow for the application to be heard at the next DMNL meeting in January.
Good, because that one's been on the books for some time, one way or another. It'd be nice to get some conclusion on that. Any other questions on undetermined majors? Okay, that draws the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Mott.
No, it's not meeting related, Chair, but it was just an observation that when I was watching the meeting online last month, all that you can see is the black square with the committee in the corner, which makes it very difficult to follow who's speaking when you're watching it online. So it was just really an observation that maybe we can sort that once the officer has finished displaying the documents and pictures, etc., that the committee can then be returned to full screen rather than it being a small box in the corner.
We'll see if we can.
Please.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Moody.
And one final thing I'd like to say thank you for the new planning portal set up. It's so much easier to find your way through planning applications online. It's a good improvement, except for the fact that you've got to tick so many boxes and agree to certain conditions to get into it, which you didn't have to before. But it is much easier to manoeuvre your way through.
Happy to hear that. Okay, any more before we close the meeting? Councillor Mann.
Sorry, I was just going to say on that basis, I contacted Helen Smart and she is going to meet with me next week to go through the planning software, as she had requested. So in case anybody else that was on the committee wanted to have the officer go through it with them, I just thought I'd let you know at 10 a.m. Next week here, Tuesday.
Okay. Now can I close the meeting?